Hi, everyone. I'm Kent Daniel. So I'm the Senior Vice Dean here at Columbia Business School. And my job here today is to introduce Dick Thaler. This is a real pleasure. As a little background, Dick, Tano, and I were all colleagues at the University of Chicago just about a quarter of a century ago, which is more than a little disturbing. So as you all know, Dick won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2017. I remember on the day that was announced, talking to a reporter from the BBC. The reporter seemed a little incredulous. He couldn't understand how anyone could possibly win a Nobel Prize for showing that people make bad decisions. This, of course, showed an inherent misunderstanding of Dick's work. Dick's early work did very much show that people do make bad decisions, but more importantly, he, along with Kahneman, Tversky, and some others, led the way in showing how people make these bad decisions. Basically, they ran a set of experiments as a way of on decision making on individuals, as a way of determining the mental shortcuts and biases that individuals use when making judgments, and basically built a model of where these decisions came from so that you could make better inferences. Now, of course, you have to do more than this to win a Nobel Prize. So what else did Dick do? Well, I think it's fair to say that he, maybe along with Bob Shiller, really started the field of behavioral finance, meaning the study of how these biases aggregate up and make markets inefficient. It's hard to believe now, but this research at the time that Dick started this field was really controversial. So how did it get from there to where we are now, where it's a mainstream field? Well, I think Dick really did two things to ensure this happened. First, he wrote brilliantly and prolifically about behavioral economics and behavioral finance. Dick, anyone who knows him knows he's constantly going on about how lazy he is. Well, he's not. There's a wonderful passage in Dick's book, Misbehaving, where he describes watching Kahneman and Tversky edit their Nobel Prize winning paper on prospect theory and the care they put into getting every word just right. When you read any of Dick's books, any of his papers, the reading is effortless. But of course, it takes really hard work to make this effortless and to make his ideas so crystal clear. But if you're going to change a field, you have to do that, and Dick has done it. The other thing Dick did through his writing, speaking, and his force of personality was to pull so many young economists into his orbit. He helped so many of us working in the field so much, and it made it so much fun to be a part of a team working to change the way the world thought about how to do good economics and good finance. Finally, Dick developed yet another field, one that he and Cass Sunstein labeled choice architecture, where they applied the lessons from behavioral economics, experimental psychology to think about policy design. The book that introduced choice architecture to so many policymakers was, of course, Nudge. And he and Cass have just finished the second edition of that book. And that is what Dick and Tano will be talking about tonight. So Dick, welcome, and thank you again for coming to talk to us. It's always a delight to see you.
Likewise. And I will say, we've been at it so long, both Tano and Ken were among the young people that I corrupted. So I'll just leave it at that.
That's still true.
On a log scale, though, I mean.
So thank you so much, Ken, for that wonderful introduction. And indeed, Dick, what a pleasure to have you in this second Royal Mayor lecture. So if I can add a personal note to what Ken was saying before, yes, we were colleagues many years ago in Chicago, and I have many fond memories of that earlier period of my career, and of course, an enormous debt of gratitude to so many people there. Now, conversations with Dick were one of my fondest memories. Dick is a terrific conversationalist, brilliant, of course, but also very funny, and most importantly, incredibly generous and patient with whoever he was talking to, typically trying to catch up to him always. He was indeed generous and patient with me, and for that, Dick, I'm incredibly thankful to you. I miss those conversations enormously. So the way we're going to do this is that Dick and I will have our conversation, and about 50 minutes into it, we will start taking questions from the audience, which you can start posting in the Q&A. I will read them to Dick. We'll select them, read them, and depending on how many of those we have, I can kick in with those questions sooner rather than later. So Dick, let's start. Let's get going so we can have a fun conversation about many things. But why don't we start with that very peculiar connection that you have with Roger Murray, which I didn't know that story, by the way. So why don't you share it with us?
Well, I did meet Roger Murray in a very peculiar setting. It was 1986, and there was a big will contest involving the heirs to the Johnson and Johnson fortune. And I told you the long version of this story would require many bottles of wine, but Roger Murray was the expert on the other side. And I was on the defense team defending the management of the foundation portfolio that was being managed by Seward Johnson Jr., who's a sculptor of some fame. He has super realistic sculptures. They're scattered around New York City, among others. And he and a stockbroker were managing this portfolio. And Roger Murray was criticizing it, and he was viewed as the efficient markets guy. And so they wanted somebody who was not that. And you guys know, I had written exactly one finance paper in 1986. And so I convinced the lawyers that, no, I'm not a finance expert by any means, but you could call me a decision-making expert. And we went from there. My goal was to say that the returns on the portfolio were irrelevant because that was hindsight bias.
I see.
And the judge eventually bought that line, which is quite remarkable.
Yeah, indeed. So, I mean, you have another connection. We touch upon this. As you know, Roger Murray had quite a hand in getting the individual retirement account going in the 1960s. And and I know retirement and retirement savings has been a big preoccupation of yours.
Absolutely.
So there's another point of connection there. So as Kent was saying, it's wonderful to be talking now because Nudge, that incredibly influential book you have with Cass Sunstein, has come out in its second edition. Well, you call it the final edition.
Yeah, it's not the second edition.
Yeah,
the final edition. There will not be another.
Yes. So it sounds like you're trying to commit by writing that many times in the book. I'm not so sure it's going to work, but anyway, we'll leave it at that. So, but I want to get to get everybody into the conversation and make sure that we are all in the same boat in terms of our understanding. Let's talk a little bit about what you want to do in this book, and let me start a little bit by reiterating some of the things that Kent has said. Okay, and let me summarize the entire field of behavioral economics in 3 lines. Okay, just to make it brief. Okay, so the way I summarize this, which is very similar to what Kent was saying, is that because of limited rationality, individuals use rules of thumb to assess information they're presented with, make forecasts, make decisions, and so on and so forth. Rules of thumb work well in some situations, but not so in others, leading to systematic errors. And the word systematic is important. These things don't wash out, and they end up having social impact, that we may want to do something to correct. And this is the starting point of this brilliant book, Nudge. So why don't you walk us a little bit and elaborate on this thing?
Yeah, sure. So, as Ken said, the work of my friends Kahneman and Tversky, who were Israeli psychologists based at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem when I first met them, they had the key idea, which, as Kent stressed, is systematic bias. So before us, there was a guy called Herbert Simon at Carnegie Mellon who had University of Chicago PhD. who had coined the term bounded rationality. And which is the basic idea that we don't have supercomputers between our ears, even if we're wearing fancy headphones. And but Simon didn't really make any headway with economists. He won a Nobel Prize, but did not convince economists. And the reason is that the skeptics said, so what? Yeah, we admit that people other than us are not so smart, but you know, if errors are random, then it all washes out. And of course, Milton Friedman, the great Chicago economist, had the line, the as if excuse. That if people behaved as if they were rational, then it doesn't matter. So what Amos and Danny did is to say, no, they make errors and they're predictable. So if people are using what they call the availability heuristic, which means they estimate the frequency of something by how easy it is to remember instances of that, then they will make predictable mistakes, such as thinking that there are more homicides than suicides, because we read about homicides are loud and suicides are soft. And so it was that idea of systematic bias that really made behavioral economics possible.
That's right.
And the second important principle, and this one I didn't get from them, was the idea that we have bounded self-control. So many of us are lazy. Some of us, not Kent, need to exercise a bit more, maybe eat a little bit less. Many people have trouble saving for retirement. So if people have trouble making decisions and trouble committing themselves to what they themselves think is the right thing to do, then they can use help. And so a simple example is, if you need to get up in the morning, you set an alarm. Now, the alarm is, in our terminology, nudging you to wake up, because you can turn it off. And in fact, an alarm clock, you get to set it. So if you don't want to nudge yourself on the weekend, you can turn the alarm off. Or if it's a meeting you would just as soon skip, like with the vice dean, you can turn that off. So nudges are things that attract our attention and influence us and influence humans that Cass and I distinguish from the fictional creatures that we all studied in graduate school that we call econs, which is short for Homo economicus. And these mythical creatures can solve any problem. They can look at a list of 40 different mortgages and pick the one that would be best for them, reading all the fine print. And they would always do what they plan to do, because why wouldn't they? So people need help solving problems and then sticking to their plans. And Nudge is a book about trying to help people do that.
Yeah. So this
To
idea
give them alarm clocks.
Right, exactly. And you know, for those of you who haven't read the second edition, which I recommend enormously, it's also in the first edition, this particular photograph of this alarm that runs away, that has some wheels, and that you cannot simply turn off when you don't want to wake up. So it really builds. Yeah, Locky is the name of it? Like
Clocky.
Clocky. Okay, Clocky. So the idea of commitment, right? That, you know, we have problems committing to particular, that there's two sides to us, the planner and the doer. The planner is this guy who wants to, or gal who wants to do X, Y, and Z. And then there's the doer with all these biases that prevent him from actually following the planner's instructions, so to speak. So the book is full of wonderful examples. I would touch on a couple of them, but before we go into this, so Kent was mentioning this, that you have started this massive field of choice architecture, which is kind of a systematic study of how can we present, if I understand it correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, how can we present choices to individuals in order to help them? Can you tell us a little bit how you see the research program there of choice architecture?
Yeah, so choice architecture, it seems fundamental to the book, which it was, but it wasn't an idea we had when we started, which surprises people.
So can I tell you, Dick, I mean, this is something that was more salient to me in the second edition than in the first. I think the word or the expression choice architecture has become more standard in many behavioral papers. And as a result, I read the second edition with that expression more salient in my mind than in the first edition.
Tano, it's the final edition. Right? We
Keep repeating this to yourself.
we believe in commitment strategies. So it's the final edition. So yeah, I mean, it does play a bigger role, and it's because we've had more time to think about it. So it's literally a phrase I invented in the process of writing the book. And I was motivated. There's a wonderful book about design written by a guy called Don Norman. And it's called The Design of Everyday Things. And it has the best book cover ever. And the book cover is a picture of a tea kettle that has the spout and the handle on the same side. It's right?
Brilliant, beautiful. Yeah,
it's just, and we have the elephants in the front of our book, and we kept telling the publisher, we want something as good as that tea kettle. But I had read that book many years before, but then I reread it while we were writing this book. And it occurred to me that what we were doing was thinking about choices in the way an architect thinks about constructing a building. So I've heard a rumor that you guys are finally going to have a new building. One that Glenn told me was under construction 25 years ago.
We're moving this December, so it's finally happening.
Yeah, well, I'll see it when I believe, I'll believe it when I see it. But
yeah.
So you guys have both been to Chicago Booth's building in Hyde Park. And any building, this new one that you're building, it has certain constraints. There has to be doors that you go in and out. There have to be elevators and staircases and restrooms and classrooms and offices. You can't have, a neutral building. And one of the most important points that we made in the first book, the first edition, was getting rid of this idea that there can be neutral choice architecture any more than there can be a neutral building. So think about Amazon. Amazon sells every book that's in print, some that aren't, millions of books. Imagine going into a real bookstore that had that inventory. You would run away, right? It would be the size of the Pentagon, and any way they could imagine organizing it would be inadequate and horrible. Yet you can go to Amazon and with a couple clicks find any book you want, say Nudge, the final edition. You can find that right there,
Right, yeah, exactly.
right? So Amazon and Apple and Google, you think of the companies that have done very well, even since we wrote the book. They have succeeded largely through brilliant choice architecture.
Yeah.
Right? If we want to search for something, we Google it and then we buy it on Amazon.
Right.
And if we want to watch something, we go to Netflix or Amazon. And Apple's features, you know, the beauty of the iPhone was you could open it up and immediately start using it without reading a 50-page instruction manual. So choice architecture, you know, it's like the old line that somebody didn't realize they were speaking prose until they heard the word. People didn't realize they were doing choice architecture.
Right.
Just because I gave it a name doesn't mean they weren't doing it.
Right.
Any more than we invented nudging. Right? You know, there was
Right. What I think
nudging.
is- right.
There was nudging in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
So there's always been
Very
nudging,
consequential nudging. Yeah.
quite consequential, right? So you know, I think, you know, Nudge was a great title for that book. It was a title suggested by one of the many publishers that chose not to publish the book, but they said, you know, Nudge would be a nice title for this book. And that they did us a great favor, but I think the downside of that title is it left people thinking that it's a book about tweaks.
Yeah.
Right? You think a nudge is just a little tweak. And what we've tried to stress in this rewrite is this bigger picture, that the entire choice architecture matters. And that is, we don't make a big deal about it, but that is a big theme in the way we've been thinking about things. And let me just add one other thought about that. I know I'm going on like a professor, but
No. That's the whole
there
point
have
of it.
been there have been all these so-called nudge units created.
Right.
The first one in David Cameron's administration in the UK. And one of the limits that those nudge units have is they more or less have to take the choice architecture as given. So, you know, think about things like automatic enrollment into retirement plans, the topic you mentioned before.
Right.
So that was a nice innovation. But the entire structure, so somebody invented the 401k plan.
Right.
And I mean, first of all, what a stupid name for, right? We have a retirement plan that's named after the obscure line in some long bill. And it took, I think, a decade for somebody to realize that you could use that provision to make defined contribution retirement plans
Yeah.
feasible.
It's an incredible story. Yeah.
So I like to encourage people, including CEOs and government leaders, to think about the big choice architecture picture, as well as all the little details that matter.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you a little bit about this. So I was communicating with your co-author and our colleague Eric Johnson, and he has a wonderful piece on choice architecture, and that I like in Marketing Letters, talking about the what and the how, so to speak. You know, which I think goes along the direction of what you're saying. You know, which is what should, like, the big things that individuals should be choosing about, and the how are we going to be presenting them with the particular options they have to choose from. Is that what you mean by that?
Yes, yes. So, one of the many titles we considered was Everything Matters. And, this was
Nudge is better, I have to say.
yeah, but the thought is there. And, in my previous book, Misbehaving, I coined this term supposedly irrelevant factors.
Yeah.
To describe the predictions economists have about many things.
Right.
And as you know, economists almost never make predictions about magnitudes. They only make predictions about signs.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Qualitative.
right,
Yeah.
if the price goes up, demand goes down. By how much? Oh, we can't say. There's one, probably the most notable exception to this is the equity premium puzzle, right? And the brilliant thing that Mira and Prescott, who discovered this puzzle, the puzzle is, for those of you who don't know, that the returns on stocks are higher than the returns on bonds historically. And notice, if we stop with the sign, economists can declare victory.
Right.
There, stocks are riskier,
Yeah.
returns are higher. There we go.
Yeah.
Just like
Move
we
on.
told you.
Yeah.
And so what the brilliant thing they did is to say, well, how much higher can those returns be and be consistent with the usual model that we write down? And it turned out they were too big by at least a factor of 10.
Right.
So the kinds of things we talk about are things that economists say won't matter at all. Those are precise predictions. The coefficient will be 0. And we've found lots of things like automatically enrolling people into a pension plan that an economist is going to say, that can't matter. If the company is matching, joining is worth possibly hundreds of thousands of dollars to the employee. Filling out a form is not going to stop anybody. But we know from papers like Bridget Madrian's first one that automatically enrolling people increases enrollments from 50% to 90%. Boom. With one thing that economists say won't matter at all. And it matters a lot. So.
And systematically, that's the thing. It makes a huge difference, for society at large. This is what is striking about this entire line of research. So you brought up this thing of nudge units. Kent and I were having lunch together and talking about this conversation, and we were both curious about this question of what is that you learned that you didn't know once policymakers start taking some of these ideas and projecting them into actual policy actions. What is that you learned, Dick?
Well, many things. But one thing is that governments and business and large businesses and large universities are very compartmentalized. And that means no one's looking at the big picture. I mean, maybe, the president of Columbia University is looking at the big picture, but he's looking at it from such a high level that he can't know all of the little details.
I mean, Lee is omniscient.
The
So
little details of the sort that Kent is in charge of. Much less the things that you are choosing to put in your class or not put in your class, right? And another thing is that people in government almost never run experiments. They make big decisions and they do what they think is right. And then, no, sometimes if we're lucky, some clever economist can come in after the fact and decide whether a policy had a good or bad effect. So for example, the famous Card and Kruger papers looking at whether increases in minimum wage, what kind of effect that had on labor markets. Before that paper, again, economists said, well, raise the price, demand goes down, so you'll create unemployment. How much? We don't know. That paper and now hundreds since have concluded, by and large, not so much, but we don't test those things. And I remember the first meeting I had with a minister in the UK. It was a guy whose job was to collect money from people who owed on their taxes. And there was a lot of money lying on the table. And we said, well, what do you do? He said, oh, well, we write them a letter. And then I said, what if they don't pay? Well, we write them another letter. So we said, can we see the letter? Sure, here's the letter. So there were, I don't remember how many people there were that were in this state, but it was tens of thousands. And we said, well, you could try writing different letters. Doesn't cost anything. So we got
more personalized letters to the.
Well, the not so much Dear Tano, but it was, Dear Mr. Santos, here's the winning letter. Dear Mr. Santos, 90% of New York taxpayers pay their taxes on time. You are in the minority of those who don't. And those funds go to pay for things like the Central Park Zoo. So notice writing a better letter doesn't cost anything.
Right.
And I don't know how many we tried, 6 or 8, something like that. And then this has been replicated many times.
So you ran the experiment with several different letters in that.
Yeah, I think, yeah. And then of course you replicate. And but this idea of testing is just unheard of. And that's true also in business, except in very small. So Amazon is running experiments every minute. So is Google. Right. So firms that are doing business on the internet are running experiments. And as a result, Amazon has the world's largest economics department.
Right.
But if you ask any other part of Amazon how they do things, probably not. I don't think that, well, you never want to underestimate Amazon, but they're probably not doing their hiring by experiments.
Right. But I want to ask you about this. I mean, you're bringing up, there's one part of the book that I thought it was absolutely fascinating, which is the one that deals with kind of the new economy, for lack of a better word. The fact that we have now these companies that are very data intensive, they have a lot of information about us. And in a way, they can use this information to discriminate among different individuals in order to potentially prey on their behavioral biases and to actually price discriminate in a traditional way, because I know that you have more serious commitment problems than does Ken, so to speak. So consumers are becoming, the interesting thing is that consumers are becoming very transparent to companies because of the availability of data effectively. And at the same time, one has the feeling that the pricing, all these kind of hidden fees, these commitment problems that you have when you sign on to Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever service you're streaming these days, are becoming more severe. So we're in a permanent race, so to speak, between, these very sophisticated corporations that are using the data, and of course these behavioral biases. It's a topic almost on itself. So what are you? I found your comments and the sort of particularly relevant for the kind of subscription economy that we're having these days.
Yeah. So, we have a chapter on what we call sludge. For years, I've been signing copies of the book Nudge for Good, which is meant as a plea. And it because, I know there are people like Bernie Madoff out there who knew how to nudge without reading our book, and or Mr. Ponzi, and I'm sure Mr. Ponzi did not invent the Ponzi scheme, so he just got it named for him. But so people are out there running these things, and one thing that we've seen is many firms have made it much more difficult to unsubscribe than to subscribe. And amusingly, the experience that first provoked me to start writing about sludge was a review of misbehaving that appeared in the Times of London. And my editor sent me a copy. Oh, here's the first review of your book. And there's a link and there's a paywall. And their paywall is, slammed closed. It's not
no,
like
we'll give you one article for free or anything like that.
None, not even the first sentence.
Right.
But you can have a trial subscription for a month for a mere £1. So I'm willing to pay £1 to read a review of my book. But then I start to read the fine print. And to unsubscribe, I have to first give 14 days notice, which makes it not a month subscription. Right. And then I have to call London in London business hours, not on a toll-free line. Now, for me, this would be a lifetime subscription, or at least until my credit card expired.
Right.
So I've been on a campaign to get rid of this, and I'm failing terribly. I wrote an op-ed about this in the Washington Post as part of the publicity campaign for this book, and I published it in the Post because it's the only major news outlet in the US that doesn't have this sludge, including my beloved New York Times. I think they will allow you to get out with online chat, but
right.
Don't expect that to be quick.
Exactly. So, I mean, so this goes perfectly onto something that I wanted to ask you about, which is this. I mean, one has the feeling reading the book that, these bigger themes are in this final edition even more than they were in the first. And one is, look, there's room for regulation here. I know that we're always careful as economists to bring this dreaded word into our discussions. But, a regulation that says you should make it easy for people to unsubscribe with an unsubscribe button seems like a reasonable thing to do. I'm very proud that I have unsubscribed to a couple of streaming services, but it was a morning's endeavor. And, it was absolutely surprising to see how much it took to, I was a nervous wreck by the end of the couple of hours that I spent unsubscribing to these services, which were, soccer channels of different sorts now that, that's a nightmare. I can tell you that much. So, I mean, what is the regulation side of all this? I mean, is this something that you...
So California has passed a law that says you have to be able to unsubscribe the same way you subscribe.
Yeah.
So that is pretty
Step
easy
forward.
regulation. It would work. But whether, I don't see it happening at the national level. You know, one of the things we talk about in this chapter on sludge is 90% of US taxpayers could easily get a pre-populated tax return,
Right.
because as long as you take the standard deduction, which is now 90% of taxpayers, the IRS has everything they need.
Didn't Austin Goldsby, who was in the Obama administration, propose that? I mean,
He did in 2006,
okay, so before.
and
Yeah.
it was defeated.
Huh.
And instead, Congress passed a law that prohibits the IRS from sending anybody a tax return.
And what were the grounds for that decision? Do you know? I mean,
In return, certain firms, if TurboTax and H&R Block
Oh, I
might
see.
come to mind,
yeah, I see.
promised that they would provide free returns.
Right.
So, and I don't even know which party to blame for this. I know which companies to blame for this.
Mhm.
But in Sweden, you file your tax return by text message. You get a text saying, Tano, we think we owe you 11,000 kroners. If you agree, press 1.
Right.
And then the money appears in your account. Now, that's one kind of sludge. There's another, you know, there's been a lot written about the difficulty of getting the money to people that the government was trying to help in the pandemic. And for example, the renters legislation that's about to expire, hardly any of it has been spent.
Right.
And it's because of sludge. The PPP, the money that went to small businesses, you had to be a pretty big business with a lawyer and a bank to have any real chance of getting that money.
Right.
Because it would be like applying for an NSF grant.
Yeah, exactly.
Which
It's like a nightmare.
we can tell you is no fun.
Right.
And of course, the people who need that money the most do not have a team of lawyers that they can employ to fill out all the appropriate forms.
Right.
So we all could get rid of a lot of sludge, both in the government and, you know, here's a simple one. At the University of Chicago, we have one of these corporate credit cards. And you would think that's going to make life easy, but it doesn't make it as easy as it could. So if you have a subscription to the Wall Street Journal, and they renew it, you know, you better show them something. Well, you know, it's been coming in. Well, it's nothing new. Now, here was the one that set me off. I ordered something from my office, one of these lights that makes me look beautiful, like,
Yes.
you know.
Even more,
And-
yes.
And I didn't like it, so I returned it.
Mhm.
So there were 2 entries on my corporate credit card, one for $75 and then a return for $75, 0 owed. So my admin says they need the receipt for this 0 because they want to know what it is that I didn't spend any money on.
Right.
Right? So obviously this is trivial, but it pervades everything,
Mhm.
and it just slows things down.
Yeah, and the thing that worries me the most is that, I mean, the new economy with this price discrimination is going to make it worse. I mean, I think there's some urgency to this. When I was reading your book, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about the problems that we're going to be facing going forward with all of these things. And we'll leave it at that. But I think the point is, I wanted to ask you before we switch to finance, because I want to turn to some finance questions. There's a couple of more things that I want to ask you, and one is a little bit, sort of hopefully something that I know is a concern of yours, but I thought that perhaps we could have, it could have been more in the book about, which is this issue of awareness and the ethical considerations when we actually give people the full options, right? So I'm totally with you on this issue of choice architecture involving defaults that we think are good for individuals and good for society, and that we want to have good choice architecture in order to help people make better decisions. To what extent we should be helping them as well in understanding the type of choices that people are making. You talk about a smart disclosure. Can you elaborate a little bit on this? Because I think these two things go together, and it's
Yeah.
important they go together.
So what do we mean by smart disclosure? If you think financial regulation, a lot of it is disclosure rules. Right? So corporations have to disclose earnings in a certain way, and if there's insider buying, right? There's all kinds of rules about what you have to tell the shareholders. And foods have to disclose the ingredients. And we can have an endless, boring list of disclosure rules. If you think about the way in which we disclose those, it's basically first century technology. Right? I mean, it's not much different than writing it on a blackboard. I guess, when with the printing press, maybe we're, at least into medieval, but there's no reason for this. And if you think about the financial crisis, there's a really good movie about this. But the financial crisis with the mortgage-backed security. Oh yeah, that's the one. Yeah. The mortgage-backed securities, even institutional investors had a lot of trouble knowing what was in that security. It was tranches of thousands of different mortgages. So there are lots of things. Let's take ingredients in food. You're required to print it on the label, which isn't much help. Why shouldn't all those ingredients be available also online? Now, they are for certain things that kids are allergic to. There are some rules about that.
Right.
But we advocate something called smart disclosure, which basically means making machine readable data available to consumers, and more importantly, available to firms that we call choice engines.
Mm-hmm.
And an example of that is a travel website. 20 years ago, there were people who had the job travel agent. And if you wanted to go visit your family in Spain, you'd call a travel agent.
Right, exactly.
And they would find you a ticket to Madrid and a hotel. And now you can find the best fare online in 5 minutes.
Yeah. The other day I had the depressing experience of asking my students whether they had met a travel agent, and most of them said no.
No, right.
Yeah.
They've never heard, they didn't know such a thing existed.
Exactly.
It's like there were people that used to run elevators, right? And
Kent's building has still a person running the elevator because he's a classic, by the way. So.
I see. Well, Kent is a classy guy, so yeah. I'm not surprised.
And goes with my age.
A little old-fashioned, I would say. You could learn to press the button, Kent. It's even I can handle that.
Well, this has the lever. That's more complicated.
Oh yeah, the lever. That's so. I would like everything to be as easy to buy as a plane ticket from New York to Madrid. Why should buying a mortgage, taking out a mortgage, be harder?
Right.
And the reason is that airlines are required by law to provide the pricing data in real time, and mortgages are not. And obviously, mortgages are a much bigger ticket
Of course.
than a plane ticket.
Right.
So we think that a lot could be done in this domain. It's quite boring, so it's hard to get people excited about this.
Even the
But-
policymakers you have interacted with over this last few years.
Yeah, you know, who wants to write the bill that's going to require that
Yeah.
that Amazon share with you your purchasing data,
Right.
so that would allow you to do better comparison shopping, and we know somebody will be willing to back the lobbyists on the other side. So
Yeah.
we've made a tiny bits of progress here and there, but I think much more could be done.
So can I perhaps you can touch briefly on this? The issue, there's a bigger thing. I've always been impressed by this aspect of the United States and the United States public debate, is how much framing matters. And what I mean by this is, I was listening the other day to an interview of, in relation to these sad events in Afghanistan, and someone was talking about the expression war on terror and how that affected and framed the debate on these issues. And many examples come to mind: death taxes, death panels. The plasticity of the English language plays a role here. I had a hard time coming up with similar examples in Spanish. Are there nudges for a public debate?
Well, you know who is probably the greatest political wordsmith of our generation is
Yes.
Dominic Cummings.
Oh, yes. Oh, can you tell the audience who Dominic Cummings?
So people may not know, he was an advisor to Boris Johnson.
Yes.
He has 6 words that changed the
History
future
European Union.
of the United Kingdom, which is about to become a smaller kingdom. So the first 3 words were trying to get people to vote for Brexit. And they were take back control. Now think about that phrase. You can find a speech of him talking about this, saying it's based on loss aversion.
That's beautiful. I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, it's quite explicit. So,
Yeah, you were there.
Harman and I, if
Exactly.
you got complaints, come to us. But so take back means, you lost something and you want to get it back. And, we've all written papers about this. People don't like losing.
Right.
Now, what exactly they had lost and what they were going to get back was quite unclear. Withdrawing from the EU I would argue, isn't getting more control, but it was a winning phrase. Then later in the Johnson campaign, when they were when Brexit resurfaced as the issue, he realized that the biggest emotional thing going on was exhaustion. And so the second 3-word phrase was get Brexit done.
Done.
Brilliant. Right? We want to get rid of this. Now, it's like get Afghanistan done. right? We can all, there's plenty of blame to throw around,
Right.
but if you had asked a poll of Americans, should we withdraw from Afghanistan? I'm guessing 80% would say yes. Get Afghanistan done would be a brilliant campaign slogan. And, President Trump and then President Biden honored what we won't go through all of that, but now what we've seen over the last couple of weeks is the end game of that is a mess. And, if we had had a poll, should we have, and then show the scenes from the airport, no, everyone would say, no, we don't want that. Yes, we want Afghanistan done, and we don't want that airport. So framing is very important. It's important in every part of life. It's important in politics. And the side that has the better framesmith often wins.
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge topic.
Make America Great Again
Yeah,
that was a winner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, notice,
Yeah,
again,
Yeah.
right? It's the same trick.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's beautiful. And it's very smart. So let's switch to lighter topics, and let's talk
Like
about
finance.
exactly like finance. So Dick, one of the very annoying aspects of your career is not only that you've managed to transform academia, public policy, but also you're a successful money manager, which is incredible achievement with Fuller and Thaler Asset Management. Many of our audience may not know about this aspect of your career. So, tell us a little bit about that, about how, these behavioral ideas behind Fuller and Thaler. Feel free to spill the beans if your heart so desires, we're ready to take notes.
Sure.
But tell us a little bit about that.
Buy low, sell high, we're just doing what Benjamin Graham said to do.
Right. That's a very appropriate. Thank you very much for that plug.
That's easier to say than to do.
Right.
So, I think obviously you don't want to listen to, and I don't want to give some sales pitch, but we do what we think of as behavioral investing. And the trick is we're trying to anticipate biases, but then not commit them ourselves. So I'm going to use, this could well go over Tano's head. So Ken, you're going to have to help because I'm going to use a baseball analogy.
Oh, this is terrible. Yes.
Yeah. But I'm going to speak very slowly, Tom. So there are certain pitchers that are called sinker ball pitchers, and they're called that because the ball dips as it approaches the plate. Okay. Now, it's easy to predict that batters will hit balls that go ground balls. They go down rather than up if they're facing that pitcher, because they're fooled by the pitch. So if you swing a quarter of an inch too high, you hit above the center, the ball goes down. You can understand that.
Yeah. Badly, but
now we could be going down to Yankee Stadium in your neighborhood, and I could tell you, this guy, it's pitching tonight, there's going to be a lot of ground balls, and you could think I'm a very smart guy. But if I go and I stood in the batter's box and tried to swing, well, I probably would just run out of there out of fear, but I wouldn't touch the ball. So how can I make a prediction about a professional baseball player, even though I'm not a professional baseball player. That's an analogy for what we try to do at Fuller and Thaler. So we try to predict the mistakes of security analysts and other investors and say they're going to make this mistake and we're going to avoid it by not trying to swing at the ball. We're going to just try to predict what those other people are going to do. And some of those will create buying opportunities. I say buying because we're long only.
So then the next question then is quite appropriate. And there are several people in the chat who are asking this question in the Q&A. And of course,
How they can invest, is that?
exactly what they want to know the portfolio, but no, but it is, it's an important question in a way, and I try to give a lecture about this to the students of the value investing program, which is what kind of behavioral repairs can we put in place in the asset management industry? So what kind of institutions can we have inside an asset management
Okay,
firm?
I'll give you a good example.
Yeah.
And, I had a student at Chicago called Rafe Giovinazzo. He was the only student for whom Fama and I were co-chairs of his committee.
That must be a completely psychotic experience.
So, well, he's a brilliant guy, and he now basically runs Fuller and Thaler.
I see.
Because both Fuller and Thaler are getting a bit long in the tooth.
Yeah.
But when he was a grad student, one summer, we had him come out for a month. And I asked him to do the following. There was a portfolio manager who was doing a strategy that involved earning surprises. Mm. And so a computer would generate a signal. Oh, here's our earning surprise. And then he was doing something proprietary to say good or bad earning surprise. And what Rafe did was to look and see whether this guy was adding value. And he went back through like 5 years of decisions. Do the ones that he says are good, do better than the ones that he says are bad. This is the sort of thing that most firms never bother to do. Instead, they look at returns and benchmark adjusted, of course.
Right.
But, a lot of that is luck. And things like value go in and out of favor. And it's very hard, our friend Cliff Asness looks like a genius some years and an idiot other years, as he's quick to agree. So we know that he doesn't get dumber in the years where his factors aren't working.
Right.
Yeah. And, one other thing, there's a young colleague of mine, Alex Imus, who's written a very interesting paper on sell decisions by portfolio managers. This is more or less an unexplored topic. If you look through every issue of the Journal of Finance, in each issue, there'll be 5 papers that say, do A, B, and C to find stocks to buy, hold for 1 year, then sell. Find me one that says, all right, you've bought A, B, and C. What should the criteria be for selling?
Oh, yeah.
So there's one.
By the way, this comes up in every single class in which great investors come to speak with the students. This is a question the students ask investors all the time. How do you actually take that decision to exit a particular position? What is that you see that all of a sudden tells you, I no longer want to hold this particular thing? It's a very difficult question to answer.
It's a very difficult question. The strategy I was talking about before that Rafe came and checked out, one of the things I like about that strategy is it has a cell signal, which is the symmetric version of the buy signal. So, but that's very uncommon. And, you know, certain very simple momentum strategies, if it's a purely quantitative strategy, then it will come on or off. But most judgmental strategies don't really tell you when to sell. And that has to be half the game.
Right. Absolutely. So you mentioned momentum, and that, you know, Kent, do you want to jump in with a question, given that you've thought so much about these issues? You want to jump in with a question for Dick, and then I will read some of the questions from the audience.
So I
But
wasn't thinking about what on momentum. Can I
Right.
ask
No,
something else, Tano?
Yeah, of course. You're my boss. You can ask whatever you want.
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. It feels the opposite. So that was great. Thank you, Dick. I wanted to actually ask you, you wrote a really nice editorial in the Times a few weeks ago about vaccinations and what we need to do there. And I think it was something like, the title was something like "Nudging Isn't Enough." And I wondered if you could just give us your thoughts on that.
Sure. So, you know, I think one of the major themes of the final edition is the limits of nudging. And we go through several examples of cases where defaults don't do it, or where defaults don't have the expected effect. And there are other situations, and we don't talk much about COVID in this book because I was consciously worried about writing something that opinions are changing every month. So we mention the pandemic, but something we do talk a lot about is climate change. And we say up front, we're not going to solve climate change with nudging. We have to have a carbon tax or cap and trade. I'm still an economist. You got to get the prices right. Pagoo had this right. And now nudging will help.
Yeah.
And there are lots of things. Telling people they use more energy than their neighbors, which most utility bills now have, reduces the utility bills of the high users 2 or 3%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's free.
Yep.
So when it comes to COVID, I think nudging and choice architecture was really important in what I would call the first 2 phases of the process. The first phase was when lots of people were very eager to get vaccinated, and there was lots of questions about who should go first and what the rules are going to be. And there was a lot of sludge introduced that way, by the way. I had another column back in November talking about that, and the fact that the more rules you have, the more sludge there will be, and the more it will favor the wealthy and the educated. But that was phase 1. Phase 2 was, now there was enough vaccines to go around, and we wanted to get with to the procrastinators or the people for whom it was difficult. So getting it into every drugstore and these big stadiums, and make it easy, you know, is my mantra. So making it easy and some nudging, and okay, that was stage 2. Now, you know, in states like New York and Illinois, we're getting up to 60-70% vaccinated. The final third, there are some people with very strong opinions. They're not very scientifically based, but they're strongly held. I don't think that we're going to nudge them. It's easy and it's free. And we've done all the messaging. So I favor what the University of Chicago has done, what I'm guessing Columbia has done, which is to say, if you want to come back to school, you have to be vaccinated.
That's what we're doing.
And now that's not a nudge, that's a mandate. It's not a government mandate. It's private sector mandates. Some, like the city of New York, has said you have to be vaccinated to go to a restaurant.
Correct.
So that is a government mandate. One thing I've been clamoring for is what people are calling COVID passports. Just basically a digital vaccination record. New York and California have introduced that. There's some sludge. The federal government has not wanted to get involved. And that's a problem because lots of people have vaccinations from more than one place. So people in New York may have gotten vaccinated in New Jersey or Connecticut, or maybe they were in Florida, or, you know, people in Chicago were going to Indiana or Wisconsin because there was less enthusiasm. So we need these. Why do we need them? Because if you run a restaurant, you don't want to have to be looking at that stupid piece of paper. You want to be able to show your phone a QR code and walk in. And so that's something I wish the Biden administration would move on. Some states are slowly getting started, but we need the federal government. And I'm in favor of things like what our universities are doing. If you want me to go into the classroom, then the students better be vaccinated.
Yeah, and
Sense.
right. Yeah, I was telling Kent, and I think I was telling you as well, that I just came back from France, and we were there when they were introducing the passport. And of course, you have to use all these social security records. You link it, you know, they immediately send you an email that they have on record, you know, beautifully, you know, very French-like, very well organized immediately. And then we show up because we need the passport to get into restaurants now from one day to the next. And, you know, I'm there with my wife and my two kids.
With your very nice piece of paper.
Exactly. And this is, well, that's not good enough. We have to test you and issue. It took the entire process, took half an hour. It took half an hour. I showed up at the pharmacy. They immediately, you know, of course, they know how to deal with tourists in Paris. Sat us down, tested 4 of us. Half an hour later, we had a little piece of paper that we can show with a QR. And, you know, so
well,
the
in the
realm of what is
US, you
feasible.
could get tested and it'll take 3 days, maybe, if you're lucky. And
Yeah.
so
Anyway, so can I bring you back a little bit? If I can, you know, sort of now that we're hitting the last few minutes of our wonderful conversation, you know, there's something that you and we all have discussed many, many times, you know, and I want to revisit this conversation. It was a fun conversation when the three of us had it 25 years ago. It's still a fun conversation, which is, you know, how did these things survive? What do the behavioral biases survive, right? The old discussion of whether markets, competition would do away with these things, and our own learning and sophistication and, you know, all these things. Where are we right now on this? My sense, let me just put my cards on the table, is that this is a dynamic game. The other side, the market, corporations can play it too and can actually exploit behavioral bias, create new ones. There's a dynamic aspect of these that we haven't quite got a handle on.
yeah, well, you know, the thing that I was fighting when the three of us were colleagues 25 years ago was sort of the knee-jerk reaction that, look, these biases, have to go away because people will learn.
Right.
And people would say that to me, and at the same time they would say, and if the stakes are high enough, then people will get it right. Not realizing that those two things are self-contradictory.
Right.
Because the high stakes stuff you don't do very often. You choose a career a couple times, maybe, marriage, 2, 3, most people are limited to,
Right.
buying a house. So the big stuff, we don't get the feedback. And what we know is people learn if there's immediate feedback that is linked to what if a kid touches the top of a stove, even the dumbest kid learns not to do that.
Right.
But, and most of us learn to operate a car reasonably well because we learn, the learning experience with a teenager is painful, but eventually you learn how hard to press on the gas and how hard to press on the brake.
Right.
But life, what we say this in the book, and I'm always saying it, it's not that we think people are dumb, it's that we think life is hard.
Right. And it's very difficult to basically learn a lot of these lessons by looking at others. I mean, they're very, learning is an experience good almost in some aspects. You need to actually.
Yeah, well, and if I needed to take out a mortgage now, I would go ask Doug Diamond, right? That's
A distinguished
for the
economist,
people
as you
who
would say.
don't know, he's basically the smartest guy and knows everything. So that's my heuristic. Go ask Doug. Asking one of you would be a close substitute. But nobody other than Doug is able to figure all of this out.
Right. And also like the cyclicality of it. There's a wonderful article in today's Financial Times that I recommend to everyone. And the title is wonderful. It's called, the title is Welcome to the Great Speculative Era. And I'm like, how many of these have we had in the past? I was thinking about, when we all met at the University of Chicago, we were going through the NASDAQ bubble. We had the real estate cycle. And of course, the article made an interesting point. I mean, look, these financial innovations like SPACs or cryptocurrency basically give the opportunity for the investor to invest. And you have this beautiful expression that I wanted to ask you about, what do you call it, the bored market, that people are bored. Is that
the bored market hypothesis?
Yeah, the bored market hypothesis combined with this kind of innovations make for a lethal combination. So can you elaborate on this?
I mean, certainly if we look at what's happened into markets during the pandemic, there's been a lot of pretty crazy stuff. And, GameStop and
that's an amazing story.
AMC and cryptocurrencies.
Bitcoin,
Yeah. So you guys would enjoy this. As you know, I'm a golfer, and if I get up early enough in the morning, I can go play golf with my colleague Gene Fama. And he likes to play at 10 to 7, which is earlier, but he'll stretch it to 8:30 on occasion.
Just for you, yeah.
So on my most recent walk with Gene, I asked him which is more embarrassing to him, GameStop or Bitcoin. Now you can see why he doesn't want to play with me all that often, but I don't do this very often. We don't talk shop, but I was curious, and you guys can decide what you think he would say. And he knew what his answer was immediately, and it was Bitcoin. And he said, Bitcoin because Bitcoin should not exist. Whereas GameStop, he just puts into the category of annoying Thaler stories like the Cuba Fund and so forth.
The 5% that you should expect in the under the fishing
Yeah,
hypothesis.
so it's a small company. Admittedly, the price is off by at least 10 and probably infinite, but he's learned to live with those. But Bitcoin as a currency doesn't make any sense to Gene, and I must say I completely agree.
Yeah, no, it's one of the mysteries of particularly when you have, I mean, I always tell the students that when you think about these currencies, you just look. I mean, the government can always force you to hold the currency they issue by forcing you to pay taxes on that currency, and we know what happens with these public options. They force you to do something.
Yeah,
but
it's powerful. So anyway, the board market hypothesis is, especially in the spring of 2020, there was nothing to do.
So literally, is that people were gambling out of?
Yeah, they couldn't bet on sports, so they bet on stocks. And I wrote a book. That was my pandemic penance.
Yeah.
Other than buying Bitcoin, huh?
Yeah. The protection is I don't know how to do it, Ken. So, and our Fuller and Thaler compliance wouldn't allow it. So I don't own any individual securities.
Very good. So we're running out of time. We have to close this. I don't know, Kent, if you want to drop in one last comment or question.
Nope. That was fantastic.
That was fantastic.
Thank you again, Dick.
And I want to actually recommend a book that has come up a couple of times in today's conversation, Dick, which is Misbehaving, which I like. I have to say that I like more than Nachi, even more than Nachi, also because the stories obviously feature many of the people we know. Exactly. And, I know those characters, and I know, what it took Dick to really change the view of the profession on so many things. And I was thinking about this interview, Dick, I remember something that I learned in your book in Misbehaving, and you quote Ken Arrow, fellow Nobel Prize winner, one of the great economists in history, no doubt about this, that made a simple but incredibly deep point. And it is that nowhere in the stars is written that a theory of the economy, of how the economy operates, has to be based on rationality. There can be useful economic theories that are not based on rationality, that may have actually superior positive and normative aspects to them. And I always thought, Dick, that this was, in a way, your life's work, beyond your enormous and specific contributions in the field of behavioral economics, is to convince us all of this very basic truth, that there are different ways of doing economics, equally fruitful, equally exciting, and equally, if not more, useful for society. And it's a remarkable achievement, Dick. One that I'm absolutely in awe of. So thank you so much, Dick.
Thank you very much. And Tano, this wouldn't be complete without a nudge. You can see there's a bottle over my shoulder.
Oh, wow.
I look forward to seeing you soon.
Okay, me too, Dick. Thank you so much for coming. To all of you, thank you so much for attending. And I hope you all have a wonderful academic year. Dick, thank you so much again. This was so much fun.
Great to see you both. Bye-bye.
Right.
Bye to everybody.